Welcome to Banned Books Conversations, where radical readers discuss prohibited prose. I'm your host, Tonya Todd, and we're here to talk about banned books, literary works that have been removed from a library shelf or school curriculum. Over the course of Banned Books Week, this show covers 7 different books, the reasons they were banned, and the value in reading them. Today's book is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. There will be spoilers ahead, but before we get to that, let's meet today's radical readers. We have 2 returning veterans. Veronica, please tell us a bit about who you are and what you do.
My name is Veronica Klash, Veronica with a C, Klash with a K, and I am a writer, although honestly, I'm a writer on a prolonged break from writing at the moment.
Do you want to share about your podcast as well?
Sure. The last project that I undertook was called Small Things Bedtime Love Stories. The podcast is 10 episodes long. It's available anywhere you listen to your podcasts. And it's meant to be a real soft, comforting place for those looking for a little tenderness and love before falling asleep, or just if you're looking for something relaxing to distract you from all the tension everywhere all the time.
And Gregory, you have also been here from the beginning.
I have. I'm so pleased to be back. Thank you for including me. So my name is Gregory Kompes. I am a writer. I always feel like I'm in a self-help group whenever I say that. Right. I've been writing, publishing works now for 21, 22 years. I also teach in an MFA program at Southern New Hampshire University, where I helped design part of the MFA program there. And I was there to design a few classes and have stayed, and I've been there, gosh, 8 or 9 years now, I think. So I'm a teacher and a writer and a quilter. So
And a quilter, that's your newest art.
my newest art is quilting. Yeah.
And James, you're a newcomer here. Welcome. And please tell us who you are, what you do, and then also what it is about the discourse surrounding banned books that compels you to get involved.
Sure, thanks. I'm James Abbate, editor at Kensington Publishing, an independent New York publisher. I live in Las Vegas but work remotely for them. I specifically acquire nowadays for the nonfiction imprint Citadel, though I do still dabble in some horror and suspense. I met Tonya at the Las Vegas Writers Conference last year, or well, this year actually. It's not over yet. And she's been gracious enough to invite me to this and keep me in the loop on other literary projects and events. I'm attracted to the conversation about banned books just because, well, I'm in publishing. If you ban books, you ban me. You can trace it back to the English Reformation when they were, burning books. They'd soon end up burning people. You burn ideas and stuff. While I understand there are limitations in society, I think sometimes the lines moved a little too far, and adults should be able to generally, and children to different degrees, read difficult, complex works so that we can keep conversations going and advance civilization. Without it, we stay stagnant.
Yeah, we have a difficult, complex work today, but we will get to that later. So in recent years, the United States has seen a sharp rise in book bans and challenges. What does this rapid increase say about where America is headed as a society? Gregory.
Um, we're living in really difficult, atrocious political times for our country. I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime. We read about it, right, in books, because my generation came after World War II. So I think limiting what people have access to dumbs them down. It changes the conversation. One of the things that's been proven again and again and again is people who read are much more open to the world and other individuals in the world. They're much more free and critical thinkers. They're much more likely to ask questions. They're much more likely to explore the world. And because of that, people who in power, who want to stay in power, tend to limit what people have access to. And so, I mean, the very first thing this administration did was begin banning books and support the banning of books. The very first thing, the very first actions during the first term a couple of years ago, and then returning right back to it. And so I think it's really important that we work away from that we do other things so that we can keep books in people's hands.
James.
Yeah, kind of ditto. I just feel that ultimately the more they call that the Streisand effect. The more you point to something, the more people look at it. Like when she got that house and that whole lawsuit happened, and she didn't want people seeing her Malibu home, and everyone ended up seeing the home anyway. That's what I've find is what happens. But the ironic effect is when you ban a book, now we have book clubs on it, so it draws people to it. So in a way, it kind of has a positive effect in that regard, but ultimately the access of it shouldn't be generally restricted to the general public. I don't believe it should be removed from libraries, of course. I think that's a dangerous trend, as Gregory said. It's just you again, you burn books, you burn people. It's Fahrenheit 451, which if they remove that too, then people won't even know about the process of or the phenomenon of book burning. So I think that it's really dangerous, slippery slope. Again, while even First Amendment has restrictions, I understand that. I think they use that as a battering ram to just bury things that they don't like, whoever's in power. So I think it's important to just keep the conversation going and not shut up. When people tell you to be silenced, i.e., remove books, that's a danger, and you just got to say no.
Veronica.
I had this thought this morning that I should maybe look back and listen to my answer to this similar question over the last however many times we've done this. And it just feels like we are now at a point where maybe some of the more disparate, loose ends of things that authoritarian and fascist factions of this country have kind of pulled together, and now the image of what they are attempting to do has fully coalesced. And obviously this conversation has been important for all these years because it's been a part of what now has become a systemic dismantling of institutions that are meant to encourage exactly what Gregory was talking about, critical thinking, questioning, open-mindedness. And this is where we are now. We're at the point where everything has come together, and we're seeing these plans, these really malicious plans come to fruition, and we're seeing it all come together now, unfortunately.
Well, you touched on this. Critics of book bans argue that they just disproportionately target marginalized voices, including books about race, gender identity, and sexuality. Why do you think some people in power work to suppress stories that challenge dominant narratives of identity and morality? James.
Kind of like what Greg said. It's just, if you remove, it's like a pizza pie. If you remove the slices that you don't want others to have, they can't have it. It's like you get the pie first. All right, here's it's a half pepperoni. You take out all the pepperoni, and then the other person wants to get to it, and then they got nothing. They can only have the regular cheese slices, and that's unfair. So I think it's ultimately a removal of options, a removal of choice. So it's saying, okay, I'm not even going to give you that choice. I'm going to get to it first, and I've become the arbiter in this situation. And because I don't want you to have the pepperoni, because I want the pepperoni, I'm just going to remove it from the beginning. And so that's kind of like how I look at book banning. Really, it's kind of a control. It's element. It's kind of a overbearing. Kind of I guess just cruelty. I don't know any other word for it really. So, again, I work with books, so we publish a lot of challenging material, and I don't want that stuff off the shelves on a whim. So I think just because, they challenge those traditional narratives, that's the point of literature. It doesn't mean that you have to ban it. So when that happens, I take it as a personal and professional slight or affront, but of course it has much larger societal ramifications, if that answers the question.
Veronica.
I think it's been proven time and again that when you have representation for those marginalized voices, it does have an effect of humanizing, creating empathy. When you are able to connect to stories that maybe are not entirely your own, that empathy builds the bridge between your experience, your lived experience, which might be different, to someone else's lived experience, whether that's in any type of media, books, movies, music. So eliminating the access to those stories cuts off that bridge before it's built.
Gregory?
I like the idea of empathy. I think that's a secondary outcome, positive outcome is empathy. Growing up queer, in the 70s and the 80s, it was hard to find literature where I was represented on the page. And we search for ourselves on the page first, especially as young people. It's so important to see ourselves on the page. One of the things that's been happening over the past 20, 25 years is that with own voices literature and representational literature, more and more people who are marginalized or who have been marginalized by the white supremacist publishing industry have started to see themselves on the pages of the books. And in the process of that, marginalized voices find strength because you realize you're not alone. And you realize you have shared experience, and you realize you're part of the human experience in a way that you didn't before, when all the narratives are straight white cisgender narratives. It's just for me, that was a reality, and for a lot of the people I've met over the years, that's their reality too. And so I was just at the Wit Festival, the Author Guild Wit Festival up in the Berkshires. I just got back from that this weekend, and it was amazing. There was this panel with a Black playwright and an Armenian playwright. And it was lovely hearing their journey through and navigating through the system of getting to Broadway. And both of them won Pulitzers. So, right, so they've done something remarkable that affected the world. And it's because there was a push for own voices literature that they got to begin working stronger in a stronger way through the process. So I think by having own voices, you get to see yourself on the page. You get to see your experience. And then from that, if you expand as a reader and you read other people's stories, then you find greater empathy with the human experience. So I think that all of that starts to stack up and layer up. And it's so important that we have access, not just to the books themselves, but to the process of becoming published. So all of this is connected together in an amazing way. And I think what we're seeing now is this huge backlash over own voices literature that there's been such a push for the past, I don't know, 10 to 15 years. We've really seen a push and things have really shifted. And I think this is that backlash, right? The pendulum swings. And so that's where we are, in my opinion, my humble, very humble opinion, that's where we are. And that's why it's important. So.
Veronica, what's at stake for readers who are denied access to banned books or to books that are banned?
Entire worlds, honestly. Books are amazing in what they can do for you as a person, and what they can inspire you to do, what they can push you to believe that you can do. And I think when we are cutting people off from things that we believe are inappropriate or too complex or too sordid or too whatever excuse they decide is the right excuse to prevent people from having access to certain things, you're cutting them off from the person that they might have been. You're cutting them off from opportunity, from possibility, from finding a different path. And yeah, you're just cutting them off from whole worlds that they otherwise would not have discovered. It's incredibly sad. Sorry, I'm kind of maudlin today.
Gregory.
Humans learn through storytelling. No other creature on the planet exactly. Monkeys do a little bit. There was some research that monkeys do learn. There's some mimicking that goes on within the animal kingdom. There's some mimicking actually that goes on in the plant kingdom. But humans actually learn, and they have it. Our brain has the capacity to allow us to have an experience without actually having to have the experience. So books give us access to that. It's the modern tradition of the storyteller, not just nonfiction, but fiction, gives us that experience to live vicariously through others. And from that, make better choices potentially, or well, at least some choices will be better. Others may be not better, but to make choices based on what we've learned through the experience by reading books, by seeing heroes and heroines and everybody, antagonists and protagonists, go through the journey of the story, and then that affects us, and it changes how we see the world and what choices we make. So there's an awful that I mean that's humanity that's at stake, right? By limiting the story, we limit knowledge, and by limiting knowledge, we keep people in power potentially, and people out of power. So storytelling is very powerful.
James.
I echo those. Those are really fantastic answers, really. I just think that ultimately you're threatening a person from not becoming what they ultimately can or will become by limiting them. As Gregory said, it goes from cave drawings, Epic of Gilgamesh, biblical tales, Roman tales, Greek tales, over time, thousands of years, all of this is accumulated. And, I imagine removing, Euripides or Sophocles and whatnot from, school curricula. While those have challenging ideas for high school students or junior high, uh, you know, I would be less of a person without reading those Greek myths, for instance. Even modern books tend to be more banned for political reasons and cultural reasons. I don't agree with that, but ultimately that's kind of the trend. So I don't like, and when I say modern, I mean like past 150 years in the scale of things. But you are making a person less. You're making society less by what's it called when you trim when you graft like a tree, and you remove its limbs, but not for actual beneficial purposes. I feel that you are just limiting a person and to where their mind could go by having these conversations, i.e. by developing empathy with people who don't live lives like yours. So, it's just creating limitations, and ultimately I think a dumber world, I think will just become dumber over time and more hateful and angry. And I don't think that's conducive to anyone's prosperous future.
I think it's important to note that your publishing house, Kensington, has been on the higher end of promoting diversity and inclusion in its works. Like I have taught this for years, and when they have their reports come out, Kensington is generally like number 1 or 2 for being at the forefront of on the right side of history. So I want to ask all of you, and we'll start with Gregory, how do book bans impact authors and the publishing industry as a whole?
Well, on some level, right, again, I'll step back to being a queer author. I'm happy to identify as a queer author. For decades, it was virtually impossible to get published unless you were published through a small queer press. It was the main presses, the mainstream presses would not publish queer literature. They just wouldn't. It just didn't exist because queer people didn't exist. We all know that's not true, but that was the view of the world. So the fact that so many gay and lesbian and transgender and queer and bi authors have found their way through into mainstream publishing is a sign of what change was happening and taking place. And so there are some publishers that are doubling down right now on own voices and queer voices and publishing more work as a response to the banning that's been happening. Some of that is controversy is good, right? Because it sells books. James started with that too, right? The idea that as soon as you ban something, a lot of people buy it because they want to see why it's been banned. So there's some things on the positive side that come out of all of this as well. But it can be difficult for marginalized voices still to find their way into the traditional publishing markets. One thing that's interesting, I think, about our times right now, in the past about 8 years or 9 years especially, we have seen this huge rise in indie publishing and self-publishing. Granted, there's no gatekeeper, so the quality is mixed, but a lot of own voice authors have found their way and their audience. And because of that, those audiences now have an expectation that those books exist in other markets, and publishers are listening because it's a business in the end. So if there's money to be made there, then they're more likely to publish an author, not just of a marginalized voice, but in a niche genre of things that have always been considered taboo or too outside the mainstream to even consider publishing, because you don't need such a big market anymore to be successful. A good niche market will support an idea. So there's lots of good things that are still happening. And I think the book banning focus is probably putting books into more people's hands right now. I would guess. I don't have any statistics to base that on, but I do find the book clubs I belong to reading much more diverse literature. And so that in itself is a sign that at least we're supporting the market on some level, for a broader range of market. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but that's industry-wise, that's what I think. And again, it's just thought. I don't have any real statistics for it.
Veronica.
As a writer, I feel that one of the biggest enemies that you have, obviously other than yourself and scrolling through social media, one of the biggest enemies that you have is fear. Fear of how your work will be perceived, fear of how it will be interpreted. And if you are a writer of any sort of marginalized voice, you may not want to touch certain subjects in your work, and it might get to a point where you are then stymied and you don't even write what you want to truly write because of this fear of, well, I can't put that out there because of the effect that it might have. Or look at this other book by a marginalized voice. It got banned. Obviously, I can't put things like that in my book. And it ends up making decisions for you as a writer instead of creativity or a driving need to share or to speak, which I think that's when writing is at its most interesting, when you're driven by those things versus driven by how do I cover up what I actually want to say. And not to say that other writers haven't created some amazing works with that fear kind of underlying of how do I say the things I want to say without people knowing that that's what I'm saying. But I feel like that's working from having painted yourself into a corner versus working from the center of the room with your heart open and being able to speak loudly from your chest. So yeah, that's what it is for me.
James, how do book bans impact authors in the publishing industry?
Just by making fewer of them. And that's not something, that's even intelligent business-wise. Of course, it has its societal and cultural ramifications, but from where I am in, the I guess the business chair, with my lens on, it's just why shoot ourselves in the foot? I always kind of, well, like you mentioned, Kensington's more on the upper scale, I guess, of things. And we do take pride in that because ultimately we're independent, so we're not this big, corporate conglomerate that's ultimately weighed down by decisions, in a different room entirely. But we're all, we have the power. We're all in discussion in our editorial meetings, and when we realize that, there are issues with book bans, we want to fill that void and say, okay, that's what we're doing well because we're going into that market and filling that niche where, it could be dangerous to trod. Some I do get, honestly, as an editor, I get the whole gamut, with submissions letters. So sometimes people can cite that I'm banning or suppressing their voice by rejecting them, but I'm like, yeah, but you and like 999 others, so that's not always the case. Sometimes it's just bad, and they don't want to hear that. But so it's a conflation of issues there. However, in our case, we always look at a book for its merit and what it contributes to the conversation, and kind of have no fear sort of thing. Charge in like Spartans, book bans be damned. So we always really want to provide a home for authors to come to and where they don't have to be afraid. So we obviously, kind of are going the other way as far as that cultural conversation goes. We are one penumbra to welcome everyone who wants to come. And whereas a big five publisher, for instance, may fear the flack they would get, or distribution issues, because this will get, for instance, the Vagina Bible. We published that book. We couldn't even use the word vagina in the metadata on Amazon, and it was by Jen Gunter, a doctor. So it's really a medical book popular science, but with medical elements. So, and the cover was a zipper, so it is metaphoric, but it's not, even if it were, but it doesn't appeal to the prurient interest. That's where free speech is limited, through appealing only to pornographic or sexual desires. However, the argument against that we at least championed for Amazon to allow us to use the V word metadata and the cover, rather than a black, cover, not cover coming soon, placeholder. We just said, oh, well, this is science, so it doesn't appeal to the prurient interest. So unless you want a lawsuit sort of thing, this does not apply in that case. So that was Amazon kind of just being, excuse my word, chicken shit. They're just kind of, oh, better safe than sorry a lot of the time. So when you confront them with those issues, sometimes you got to fight the good fight to get those authors out there, even for something as I guess milk toast or what is it, copacetic as a vagina Bible. That's
I
my long.
Copacetic as a vagina Bible. There's our soundbite.
Yeah, there you go. Use that for the
really
ads.
truly wonder, if it was called the Penis Bible, if you would have run up against the same issue.
That was our joke.
Yeah,
The penis pendulum, the penis tome. Well,
yeah, I wonder if that would have been an issue.
Well, we actually kind of used that against them for her follow-up books, the Menopause Manifesto and just Blood. So it's just about, what you can imagine, and it is quite visual, but in a tasteful, artistic way. So again, doesn't appeal to the prurient interest, so that base is covered legally speaking, but culturally, scientifically, all that stuff, like, we're allowed to, put these books out there. So we kind of doubled down instead of like retreating that in the future books, which I like. So that kind of showed me we had, balls, ironically. So yeah.
I think, and that comes back into what Veronica was talking about, the idea. You didn't use the words, but the idea of an author self-censoring, right? Self-censorship that occurs because you're so afraid that you can't get your idea out into the world, so you don't even write it. And that does so much damage. And I think that's at the core too of all of this idea of book banning, this idea that those ideas are too whatever to put out in the world. So why even write the book? Because I won't even be able to get my idea out into the world. So they start winning at that level too, right? And it's worth bringing up Maurice by Ian Forster, right? Because he wrote this beautiful queer novel that he's in his will said, please wait till I'm dead to publish. So he knew he couldn't publish it in his own time. And it's one of those novels that's become a classic that's stood the test of time, as it were. But he was so afraid to have that connected to his name during his lifetime. So I bet you there are a bunch of novels in people's hard drives, right? That they're maybe too afraid to try and put out into the world because of their topic matter. So it's a very important topic. I think this idea of self-censorship as a creative and how we manage that on many levels, not just on, there are people who won't write about their family stories and who won't write about their own experience, or we're going to get into this in this novel, right? That the idea of taboo sexuality, all those things, right? That people just feel like they can't write about. So it's a very important idea to sort of have out there in the universe for future exploration.
So how can everyday readers take action to defend the right to read, Veronica?
There's a lot of things that you can do, obviously, just with your own choices. There are things out of our control. So much is out of our control. But being active in your local community when it comes to, do you know who's on your school board when there's an election for that type of thing? Who is running? Who do you want controlling or deciding things for your city's children? Whether or not you have kids yourself, this is important when you're looking at meetings that your library is holding for things like that. That is all actions. Those are all actions that you can take as a private citizen. And then beyond that, there are organizations that are working within this sphere to try to create a scaffolding of support for individuals that are interested in combating this level of authoritarianism in our lives. Unite Against bookbans.org. They have some fantastic resources, talking points, ways that you can participate and feel engaged and as if you're making a difference, because that's really, I feel, one of the biggest weapons in the arsenal of the folks that are spearheading this attack on our education, an attack on our critical thinking, is the idea that we will feel so overwhelmed and so helpless that we'll just throw our hands up and go, well, there's nothing I can do. But there's always something that you can do. And even if it's those small little things, it does give you a measure of a sense of control, and you're kind of pulling back that idea of, I am helpless, I am overwhelmed. No, you're not. There are things that you can do, whether or not you want to do them, up to you. But if you are feeling like I need to take some modicum of control back, those are ways that you can do that.
James.
Yeah, all good points, kind of riffing off that. Yeah, I mean, I always say call your representative, or your senator, but you can always do things more on the local political level. And that's how, like you said, school board, local politics, town hall, council, all that stuff. Because if everyone does that on, localism, because it's a federalist nation, everyone can on the local level. If that's replicated, boom, here over in Chicago, Las Vegas, Kentucky, Michigan, Florida, wherever, if everyone does their own part there, then collectively it can coalesce, and you can see that movement sort of against that happen. So the best way is, where can we be the most powerful? Where can we be the most efficacious? And I would not say it's running to call the senator right away. It's, like you said, getting involved in the physical local town where you are and can actually even drive to if need be, and show up and say, hey, here's my face. Over a phone they can hang up on you. At least, if they got to see your face, they're in public, they don't want to be embarrassed, you can put the screws to them too. And I'm not saying this as like a violent method by any means. I'm just saying that's just how politics works. That's just the way it goes. So when it comes to book banning and stuff like this, make your voice heard. Don't roll over, because before you know it, it'll be too late, and all the laws will be passed and everything will happen and it'll be done. So you got to create friction. You got to be an obstacle, sort of, and say, no, these are our rights. First of all, they are granted. I think legally you should be able to win these cases, but of course, money wins court cases a lot of the time. So even though you're in the right, you could still be in the wrong, per se. So I think just keep the conversation going, having book clubs like these, having discussions like these. Hopefully they're replicated around the world, really, for the future of humanity.
No, you're right. Money wins court cases, but also we vote with our dollars. We saw that
Yeah. Yes.
very recently, that when collectively we decide this is unfair and we are going to vote with our dollars to support or really oppose something that we feel is fascist, change can happen.
Yep. Vote with your dollar. Yep. And then publishing companies too will also respond to that. Corporate America does respond to backlash. So when they say, oh my God, no one's buying all these other books, maybe we shouldn't have taken part in that book ban, then again, just put the screws to them.
Gregory, how can everyday readers take action to defend the right to read?
I agree with the school board thing, whether you have kids or not. It's so interesting, but so many of the bans that started about 10 years ago that are now really happening. Like there's momentum now, but they started a lot of those boulders rolling downhill. They were little pebbles at the time. And sorry for the terrible analogy, but it was through school board. It was through school board appointments, and that's having a huge impact. So if you've ever wanted to get into politics, school board is a pretty low stakes entry, and it's where a lot of decisions get made about community. So it's something to consider. City councils too. I also think it's worth. I have two other ideas. One is promoting the idea that the Brooklyn libraries out of New York continue to offer a free library card to youth and access to all these books that are banned. It's free. There have been teachers around the country who've been fired for actually promoting the free library cards. So it's very controversial, but it exists. So if you're a young person who happens to be watching, the odds of that are low. But if you're a young person who's watching, I mean, the reality is the Brooklyn libraries offer free library cards, so it gives you access. My other suggestion, and it comes on the financial side, is to buy books. Buy them. And don't go to Amazon. Go to your local. I mean, we all go to Amazon for lots of things. So I'm not saying that doesn't exist. But if you have a local bookstore, an indie bookstore, go and buy the book there. Talk to the owner of the store. Have them guide you into the books that they think you should read, because they're curators. Indie bookstore owners are book curators. They create collections based on ideals, concepts, and when you buy books from them, it's the economy, right? We live in a capitalist society. So this is a business. So buying books from small stores supports your local community, supports that bookstore, keeps them in power. When there are events, I went to an event today. There were 800 people in the audience at a book event today, here where I live. I love living in Delaware. I just moved here and I'm very excited to be here. There were 800 people. It was a history book event. And anyway, there were 800 people in the auditorium, and you buy a ticket and they give you a copy of the book that's being discussed as part of your ticket price. Like, it's a great concept. So the author does well. They sell a lot of books. They get a spike in their markets, right? In the process. This was not a banned book, but the idea here is buy books, buy locally, go to author events, go to signings, support writers. Because if you don't support the writers, then the books don't come out. That's enough, you know what I mean? So you have to be on both sides, and then you have to read the books. I think reading in general is a very good way to join this conversation of the power and the power of words on paper, words in audio, words, right, and writing. So you have to support the writers and therefore the publishers. So all of those little pieces. But buy a book, and frankly, borrow a book. When you borrow books at libraries, it has a huge impact for authors, especially now. And if you're going to borrow a book, my recommendation is to borrow a digital copy, because the authors actually do pretty good financially when you borrow a book. And there are good records of who's reading what, and the publishers see that. So if we're all reading these books that are banned through our libraries, through our bookstores, it takes away some of the impact, and it creates a different conversation.
I just want to
excellent
add
ideas.
to what Gregory was saying. I think oftentimes there's a misconception from readers that, oh, if I borrow a book from the library, it doesn't support the writer in the same way. So definitely not. When you borrow a book from the library, that is even more amazing, because libraries have to purchase multiple copies, whereas you, just a single person, obviously, yes, please buy a book if you would like to buy a book. But if that is not within your budget or your bandwidth, and you still want to support the author, borrowing from the library is such a great way to do that, and it costs you $0.
Right. On that same, and then I love libraries. On that same note, the other thing that happens is when you borrow books from libraries, it helps them with their numbers. And it shows that there's a need within the community because of your access to support the library from the community level. So all of that's really important too, because we have to keep our libraries open, especially during this assault on books. So important.
Yeah, that is an excellent point that hadn't even occurred to me, that last part. Like, yes,
Right.
we're fighting for our libraries, but use them.
Use
That
them.
is a way to
Yeah.
fight that.
That's the
That is a
best
way
way
to
to
fight.
fight for the library. Be a number for them. Absolutely. To be fair, I love to buy books. I buy a lot of books because I can afford it, and I like supporting authors, and I read 60 or 70 or 80 books a year. But I make a point at least once a month, if not twice, of visiting the library and taking something out. Even though I can afford to buy it, I take the book out of the library just to be supportive of my community.
That's the way to go. Really, and that ties back into localism too. Everything can be done with, yes, supporting independent bookstores, for instance. We don't want them to go out of business. Before long, Barnes& Noble will be the little guy, and that'll be out too, and it's just going to be Amazon, Big Brother. So I think it's really, really, really important to anywhere in Las Vegas or wherever you are, whatever city, frequent those bookstores more than you would Amazon. I do feel guilty because I did get this off Amazon, but in hindsight, I think I might just even go get another copy from a local bookstore out here too.
Yeah, that's a great idea. See, we're inspiring each other.
Yes, yes, and lifting one another.
Yes, and thank you for your transparency.
Of course.
So now let's focus on today's banned book. Published in 1955, Lolita tells the story of the aging Humbert Humbert's obsession, kidnapping, and victimization of a 12-year-old girl, Dolores Hayes, whom he describes as a nymphette. Fear of censorship in the US and Britain led to it being first published by Olympia Press in Paris, France. Yet once it was released in the US in 1958, it became the first book since Gone with the Wind to sell 100,000 copies in its first 3 weeks. If any part of this book offended you or made you uncomfortable, how did you react to those feelings, Gregory?
Well, the first time I read this book would have been probably in the late 80s, I think. I didn't make it through. I stopped reading it. I just found so much of what was going on in the text so bothersome. And so that was my first reaction. I just stopped reading it. It wasn't required for a class or anything I was doing. I was just sort of working through my adult reading list. And everyone says you should read Lolita. And interestingly, now that I'm older, I've read the book probably 3 or 4 times now. I agree. I think people should read Lolita because of the journey of the novel and the narrative, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. So my first reaction was I can't even read the book because it was so offensive. And then I found my way through. So I was on both sides, literally, of the coin.
Mm-hmm. But it's your right to just put the book down, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Even when it's a book for class, unfortunately, they don't make young people read enough books anymore. But even when it's a book for class, there have been several things I've put down. James Joyce's Ulysses, I gave up. So I have since made it through. But yeah. Anyways, we have our books, we have our moments, right? So and our choices. Yeah, it's absolutely okay to put a book down. Absolutely okay. I'd already bought it anyway, right? So the economic work was done. But
Veronica.
I came to Lolita kind of in a strange way. Obviously, as a writer, you know of this book's existence. It looms large in more ways than one. And I kind of was like, I don't think Nabokov's writing is for me. So I never really engaged with it until I realized one of my favorite podcasters had done a series called the Lolita podcast that unpacks the sort of cultural effects and sort of the aftershocks of this very important work. By the way, it is Jamie Loftus, the Lolita podcast. Highly, highly recommend. So I was like, well, I want to listen to the podcast. I have to read the book. Can't read the book and I can't listen to the podcast without having read the book. So that's why I read it. And yeah, there were several times where if I didn't have this very specific motivation, very likely I would have put it down. But I was like, no, I have to get through it. I cannot listen to the podcast until I finish the book. And I really want to listen to this podcast. And then kind of in a different experience in preparing for this conversation, I borrowed the audiobook version, and boy, has that been terrible. My goodness. It's narrated by Jeremy Irons, and I cannot tell you the kind of experience that it's been having that man's voice in my head all week, saying these things in an incredibly convincing and realistic manner. And again, if I wasn't listening to it for this conversation, I probably would have stopped after day one, because my God, my stomach was turning. I've had nightmares. It's been truly, truly terrible to have this man just penetrating my thoughts. It's really disgusting. But again, very powerful performance by Jeremy Irons, delivering this voice acting as Humbert Humbert. So yeah, I think being uncomfortable can be important, because it allows us to reach different parts of ourselves and access different parts of ourselves. And so often in modern life, we avoid discomfort. And I think there's an important element to kind of sitting with discomfort a little bit, and not just sitting with it, but thinking about it. What is it about this that's making me uncomfortable, and unpacking that, and maybe finding some self-discovery that way, finding some new paths within that discomfort. But it does require some reflection versus just, let me put this down and never think about it again.
I just wanted to say I also had that issue, because I was doing the Kindle with the audio, because I wanted to see the way the words play, the sentences played out on the page from a literary perspective, but also I thought it might be enjoyable to have this lovely voice. And I think that his voice is titillating and delicious. And it was very disturbing to have that with these thoughts. And it was plaguing me. It was like, oh, part of me is responding in this visceral way that it should not to things like this. And the other part is revolted. So I just want you to know you're not alone.
Yeah, I actually, the last round, I listened to the Jeremy Irons Kindle version too, and I adored it. I loved it because he does such a nice job with the text. He really interprets the text in a brilliant, lovely, human way, and that's what makes this so disturbing, right? When he makes
Right.
Humble into a person, an actual human person, through
Yes.
his narrative. It's very disturbing, and yet I could not stop listening. I've listened to him twice now. I've listened to it twice because I can hear the text in a way from that hearing than in my own reading of the words on the page.
Hmm.
It's
So
really,
even though I was disturbed, and I too I had one nightmare about this, but I still made sure that every word I heard in his voice, because his performance was so powerful. And it also helped with the French. Like, it's
mm,
good to see the French on the page, but it also helped to hear it. He just did a fantastic job.
yeah,
Unfortunately, it was a disturbing job, but he also played the character,
yeah.
so that probably gave him some insight into it. And I'm sorry, James, we did not get your answer to
Yeah. Well, it's probably for the best for everyone, because maybe I'm just a sociopath, and it takes a lot to disturb me. No, my mom actually showed it to me when I was 10, the movie. She's a big cinephile, and I actually watched things like Puppet Master, Diary of Anne Frank, these challenging things when I was like 9, 10. Not necessarily reading them yet, but so I kind of started off young playing Grand Theft Auto, so that kind of made me maybe a little bit numb, so upon reading this, like, it doesn't disturb me. It's I see the disturbing elements, of course, but me to have a visceral reaction at this point, like at this point in time, I'm 35 now. I think the die is a little too cast. But I did read American Psycho a few years ago. Bret Easton Ellis, that the postmodern sort of like stab, 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 play with blood. There's very, intellectual chapters discussing, finance and couture and fashion and dining, and then another chapter is just like, playing with his victim's blood and just like almost diarrhea, on the page. But I see that was the closest I've ever become to becoming disturbed by a work I read, just because it was so visceral and the structure was different. And with an unreliable narrator here in Lolita as well, it did get a rise out of me in the sense that, like, oh, okay, I know this is taboo, but because I've already kind of had that brain block in me, I never really truly felt disturbed. Um, had I not seen the movie when I was young, and maybe had I read this when I was like 17 or 18, I would feel differently. But now my lens is just a little bit more removed. But had I read at the time in 1955, it would have been scandalous. Probably would have ran out into the street screaming, like, what is this? Before I could finally digest it.
Just out of curiosity, which version of the movie did you watch?
It was the 1962. What's the director? Stanley Kubrick?
Mm-hmm.
That was the one, right? What was the other
Okay.
one? What was the other version?
I don't remember who the director was, but it was with Jeremy Irons and Dominic
No,
Swain, I want to say.
no, my
Yeah,
mom was old Hollywood.
97.
My mom was old Hollywood. I don't think she showed me anything before The Godfather.
So
I
Veronica,
mean, after The Godfather.
what is the value in reading or asking readers to grapple with morally uncomfortable texts?
I think I kind of touched on this earlier, but that's part of the purpose of books, is to push your limits, to get you to explore new ways of thinking. And again, if you are never uncomfortable, if you are always seeking, which again, who am I to begrudge people feeling comfortable these days? The world is literally on fire all the time. If you want to be comfortable, by all means, be comfortable. But there is value in sometimes challenging yourself and experiencing things that push you outside of that comfort zone. And if anything, it gives those comfortable places, the comfortable media, more power if you are allowed to contrast it with things that kind of push you to different places, and it gives you context for things. So I'm speaking kind of vaguely, but I do think there is a value just for your own self-reflection, for your understanding of what you enjoy in media versus what makes you think twice about engaging with it. And then you're able to make choices for yourself, right? Not choices for other people. That's the whole point. Make choices for yourself, but you need to be able to identify, oh, this is what I don't like, and that's why. And I'm going to steer clear of that. That's fine. But you have to try first, right? Just like when you're a toddler, how do you know that you don't like it if you don't try it? And I like the idea of books as food, because they are very nourishing.
And delicious.
And delicious.
James.
Which question can you just, so it's fresh in my
Sure.
head?
What is the value in asking readers to grapple with morally uncomfortable texts?
Growth, ultimately. Again, I would always argue in high school with the mathematics kids. They'd be like, STEM, hard science, that's where it's at. Why all this loosey-goosey, useless, uh, can't prove right, can't prove wrong literature? I'm like, because how are we communicating right now? Via ideas, via speech. We couldn't even talk about mathematics. We couldn't talk about the concepts surrounding mathematics without literature. So without the most challenging literature that pushes boundaries and limits, we can't really, it's like strength training with the muscle. We can't really get stronger. We'll just always plateau. So plateauing is bad, just on a common sense basis. But it's important to kind of help others see that if they're a little too rigid and, what should be in a library, for instance, or what should be in a bookstore. I think, you know, especially if they're the ones who are banning it or removing it, you need to speak with those people, especially, and just have one-on-one human conversations sometimes if you can get them alone and just say, hey, you know, here's the pros versus the cons. I made a list. Can you send me your list of pros and cons and why your cons outweigh the pros, you know? Little like pun on pros, but like you can really show them, like, I think almost like pretty objective reasoning as to why. So at the end, it just comes down to how stubborn they are.
Gregory.
I think people should be pushed into uncomfortable situations when it comes to knowledge all the time. I think it's how we grow. We have to be challenged to grow. And I think one of the problems is that too many people live in their bubbles now, right? I mean, we were having this conversation about algorithms and things, where we're getting fed ads and fed information online that keeps us in our bubble. We're seeing this huge divide in the country, and there's been several studies now and a couple of good books about the idea that the algorithms are actually fueling all of this, because we don't have fair and balanced news anymore. So, you know, used to be, I was a newspaper boy for many, many years as a kid, right? You read the whole paper. Your parents read the whole paper, and there were all kinds of stories in there about all kinds of things, a whole range, whatever was going on in the community and the world, and you saw it all. And it was written generally from a position where the editorial hadn't taken a position. They were just presenting the facts, and it was up to you as the reader to decide how you felt about stuff. And that's been eroded. So I think knowledge comes from being taken into uncomfortable places. You know, I'm not a big sports physical person, but I agree, right? You have to push muscles to a point where you achieve growth, right? Tonya, especially, right? You get all this stuff, right? And so I think that's incredibly important. And then I'm going to go back to where kind of, I think Veronica started us down this path at the beginning, but the concept of empathy. I think when we read stories about other people that maybe make us uncomfortable, we start to develop empathy for other people for different reasons. And one of the things that made us uncomfortable, as we talked about the Kindle version, was that we had empathy for Humbled. And I think that's right. That's really uncomfortable to have empathy. And I think it's part of the beauty of this book, is that we see this monster as human. So I think all of those things, and this all ties into the core. One of the planks of book banning is things like that make straight white men uncomfortable, right? The 1619 Project, things about slavery, all of this stuff that's being banned and taken out of the Smithsonian and taken out of our museums and taken out of our world is because people were made uncomfortable by it. And I think we should be uncomfortable at times and have to confront that. We have to figure out how we feel about that and what we're going to do with that information. Doesn't mean we have to act in a certain way, the way the state says, or the way a teacher says, or the way I say. We need to figure out how we feel about controversial, hard, difficult things that are just human, right? Because humans are horrible and fabulous all at the same time. So I think people should be pushed. I think people should be asked to read uncomfortable texts, from a moral standpoint, from a religious standpoint, from a political standpoint, from a whatever. It's also interesting that the things that are more realistic are way more uncomfortable than fantasy novels, where we see some of the exact same topics and the exact same things happen. But because they don't fall into the idea of realism, we can our brains can help us to accept that easier, right? But when we get into realism, it can be really hard for people because they read it as a truth. And I think that's very telling. Anyway, so I think it's all of those things. It's all jumbled up together, right?
On that point that Gregory was making about the algorithm, one of the things that's very different for young people now is they do have so much choice, maybe too much choice. You know, when I was growing up, whatever was on TV is what I was watching, whether it was a movie from, you know, a year ago, 2 years ago, 50 years ago. That's what I was exposed to. And now there's kind of almost this gap where young people are not as exposed to previous media because they're kind of siloed, because the algorithm will just serve up the things that currently interest them. And so it kind of creates this very isolated niche. So choice is great, but we do need to encourage people, to make choices that push them outside of what the algorithm might normally serve them.
And Gregory, I think we see some of this in our shared book club. We're part of Henderson Writers Group's book club. And it used to be one person's job to come up with all of the books for maybe a 2-year period. And Amanda Skenendor, an author who has been part of these conversations, she suggested that we start sharing that responsibility so that she wasn't the only person deciding what everyone else was going to read. And I think that was a brilliant idea because we've been exposed to books we never would have had on our list.
Yeah, I agree. I'm in a book club here in Rehoboth Beach, and there is a committee that selects all the books, and that you end up with this narrow window of what the books are, because you're not being the whole group isn't having input into what they find interesting, what ideas, and so you do end up in this very narrow path. And Amanda was right. That was such a great suggestion, and it served the group. It's been 6 or 7, at least. No, it's probably been 8 or 9 years now that that group has been doing that, where individual members bring books to the table. Really
Right.
good suggestion.
And it's still going, that we're still being exposed to things that we look at it and we're like, I was never planning to read that. And then you do, and you get something out of it. And maybe it's not your favorite book ever, but you still gain something that you wouldn't have gained if you had just put on your blinders and only picked books that were on your radar.
Yeah. And I also think, and we've talked about this in that group, but the idea that when you're in a book club for a long period of time, you start to have a body of language based on the content you've consumed as a group and the conversations you've had as a group. And I think that's incredibly useful too, because you've been exposed to so many ideas. And you have some inside jokes, right? Everyone knows there are a couple of books I do not like, and they come up all the time in conversation. And so, and there are a couple of books we love, and those come up, and we use those. And oh, you remember when we read this and we thought this, and now I'm thinking differently because that sort of connection stuff.
Yes.
And that's all that improves critical thinking about literature. I think consuming content and having a conversation about it.
So that brings me to, this has been, Lolita is Nabokov's most famous and polarizing novel. It's on the American Library Association's list of most banned and challenged books from 2010 to 2019. And according to Politics and Prose, it was banned as obscene in France from 1956 to 1959, in England from 1955 to 1959, Argentina in 1959, and New Zealand in 1960. But despite its controversy, Lolita won a National Book Award, or it was a National Book Award finalist for fiction in 1959. It's been included in many lists of best books, including Time's list of 100 best novels, Le Monde 100 books of the century, Backleben World Library, Modern Libraries 100 best novels, and The Big Read. Those challenging Lolita often cite its content without engaging with its literary merit. So what do we lose when books are judged solely by surface level subject matter rather than its deeper narrative elements? And we'll start with James.
Kind of echoing off what Veronica said so eloquently, we lose worlds, really. There's books I didn't want to get into, or works or TV shows I didn't want to get into because I judged a book by its cover or by the surface level when I was younger. But over time, like, oh, if other people like it, maybe there's something here. Maybe it's not my cup of tea, or maybe there is merit and I need to go deeper and give it a real try, a real effort. So I think that you would lose a lot, because if they try to ban Harry Potter originally because they're like, oh, witchcraft, back in the late 90s. So we would lose all of that. We would lose potentially everything, really, from like Lord of the Rings, to Game of Thrones for violence and whatnot. So it just wouldn't be a pretty scenario. Ultimately, I think that, I go back to the Reformation too, where people, the Catholics and Protestants would burn one another all the time because of their interpretation of the Bible, or publishing Martin Luther's works, for instance. Depending who was in charge, was it Queen Mary, or was it Elizabeth? Who would they burn? Whoever's not in power, basically. So that's what happens, I think, when we judge by the surface level and say, oh, Catholic work, oh, Protestant work, 500 years ago. Today, that same methodology is still being applied. So we lose people too at the end of the day. We lose thoughts, we lose history, we lose, 200 years from now when people look back, I hope Lolita is preserved as, yes, a controversial banned book, but it still makes it through and then it's not banned permanently. That's the goal, to keep it in print, to keep conversations going about it. And if we just judge it by its surface level and say, oh, this is smut, it's indecent, like the French said, in the 50s, then it may not even be in print today, and it could have died a death, and that would have done an injustice and a disservice to its literary merits.
Yeah, you said judging a book by its cover. This book has had so many different covers.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You would get a very different judgment from each of these covers. Like, it ranges from the just completely boring, it looks like the most dull book you'll ever pick up in your life, to just completely bizarre books that you have no idea what the topic is going to be. At least yours is artistic, the version that you have right now.
It looks like the Kurt Vonnegut reissues. This is it's a cloud, right? And a silhouette of, yeah, I like that. It's kind of simplistic. Maybe not the best cover, but given the content, it's kind of, what would you put on the cover, like
It's at least neutral.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
some of them are not neutral and also not what the book is even about.
But they do that on purpose so that you're not judging the book by its cover, because it's kind of not counterculture, but counter I don't want to say counterintuitive, but I don't want to say deceptive either, because that has a negative connotation. But it's kind of doing that on purpose. It's saying, look, it's a book about clouds. Relax.
You would not. You'd be disappointed if you thought it was going to be a boring cloud book.
Then you read the cover copy. Oh, okay, this is more up my alley. Yeah, I don't care about nimbus clouds. Yeah.
So, Gregory, to repeat the question, what do we lose when books are judged solely on surface level subject matter rather than their deeper elements?
Well, you lose the ideas, right? What's so interesting about this book to me, and especially having read it several times now, because you have to get through all the uncomfortable stuff to get to what's important about this book. It's a confession, right? It's a confession. It's a memoir, and so it's coming from this very broken narrator, right? He's been in and out of sanitariums. He's had all these other kind of emotional problems. There's all kinds of stuff that I'm sure there's literature now, right, about what he was suffering from, right? I'm sure psychologists have done deep dives into this novel and figured out what the psychoses are and all of that stuff. There's a lot going on in this novel with this character who's terribly unreliable, who said at the beginning he has perfect memory, and then 20 pages in, he's trying to remember a name and he can't remember it. And then later on, he can't quite remember the sequence of events. And later on, he can't quite remember, you know what I mean? So there's all of this stuff going on. So this is really a book about an idea. And it's a book about a broken human being, terribly broken, who does horrific things, right? I'm not negating the rape. I'm not negating any of that. But this is a book about an idea. And it's about a white male in power who breaks all the rules and gets away with it to the very end. He would have gotten away with it if he hadn't murdered somebody, right? So
yeah,
right. And it's okay. I mean, the book's been out since the 50s, 1950s. So
if he hadn't hurt a man,
right.
If he hadn't hurt a man,
and he hurt a man, right? And his friends all kind of ignored it in the beginning. I mean, the whole thing was broken. Everybody in this novel, everybody in the novel is broken, including Dolly, right? She's broken as well. She's been abused before he gets to her. She's been abused. So there's all of this stuff going on that mimics society. That is a commentary on society. It's a commentary on power. There are all these other ideas, and the sex, the rape becomes a tiny, tiny part of this book, because the book is about all these other ideas. And without the rape, none of those ideas could be explored, right? So there's all of this, all these layers and levels, which is why I think this is such a brilliant novel. It really is a brilliant novel. And so if it's just banned outright because of the surface concept that this is about a man raping, statutory rape, right? Then we lose all the other stuff that's going on. And I think we would lose all the reasons this book was written. And I think Nabokov did not shy away from controversy. There are lots of his stories that are incredibly controversial, just not as controversial as Lolita, that explore ideas in really bizarre ways. because he's just brilliant, right? To the edge, right? Nabokov, I think, is brilliant to the edge. So he breaks all these rules. So all of this for me would be lost if this book had been banned in the 50s before I was on the planet. I would have never even known about it. Right. And so I think it is a brilliant example of a whole bunch of different things. And it's incredibly disturbing, which I think is very good too. And I think if it weren't for the controversy, the book would have just fallen into the heaps with all the other books that nobody knows anything about from the 50s. Do you know what I mean? But because of the controversy, because of the banning, it keeps it in the forefront. And in the process, people keep assigning it to their students, and therefore we keep reading it. It shows up on all the lists, so we keep reading it, and we keep having a conversation, and it continues to inspire conversation on all these different levels, right? From the banning concept to the literary concept that are in there. So if this book is out, it's ideas that we lose. We lose the idea. Yeah. Sorry, I'm on my soapbox. I'll step down.
That's okay. It's
No,
why you're here.
I think that's great. Can I respond to that really quick? I don't want to.
Yeah.
No, I agree with a lot of that. And you kind of see parallels of that where it echoes even in books like The Stranger, Albert Camus. He really gets in trouble for murdering the guy in Algeria. But the main thing is he's like, I'm on trial for my life, for my sick, anti-society, not towing the line sort of ideas. That's what I'm really on trial for here. And that's kind of, I see between Lolita and The Stranger a lot of these parallels. And it is, he's a French dude, murders someone, but it goes deeper than that, really. At the end of the day, there's a lot tied into it. And even that has had issue, Albert Camus, existentialism, all that, so it's kind of cool seeing these books in dialogue with one another and as they apply to curricula. And I think it's Humbert because I did the pronunciation.
Right.
Oh,
And very French,
right.
Humbert. So, but I did read. I kept reading it as Herbert Humphreys. I'm like, nope, that's not what it is. So I had to train my brain.
there are a lot of contradictory pronunciations that have to do with this book and with the author. Like I could not find a consensus on how to pronounce the author's name, and so I just went with the one that was by someone with an accent
Nabokov.
because all the other ones.
Nabokov.
You did too.
You got to watch a video of a Russian just
Right.
talking like, okay,
it was when
that's
a Russian said it. Veronica, do you have anything to add to the question, and do you need me to repeat it again?
Oh, no, I remember it. To be as dramatic as possible, we lose our humanity. It's an essential part of who we are as a people, to be able to look beyond the surface. That's kind of what makes us who we are. And losing that ability, I think we lose a big part of being human.
So taking into consideration the literary merit and the controversy surrounding Lolita, what is the value in reading it, Gregory?
Well, I think my last little rant, it was in there. I think, well, what's so interesting, like just this year, I've read Lolita, twice this year now. The Whale Tattoo, right, by Ransom, A Little Life by Yanashari, Bastard Out of Carolina by Dorothy Allison, who died a few months, about a year ago now. So sad to lose her. The Plowman by Zupan, A Season of Perfect Happiness by Fisher, and The Kite Runner, right, by Hussein. All of these books, they all have the same kind of themes to them in a way. They're very dark and and a lot of them have been banned, and right. And so I think the literary merit is the conversation that comes, whether it's in public or in our own brains, the conversation that comes from being exposed to these ideas. Ideas are powerful, and seeing humanity through different lenses is incredibly powerful. And we lose that. That's just gone, right? It's just gone in most previous books.
Veronica.
The type of writing that Nabokov does is not necessarily my cup of tea, but you can't deny the way that he just slips under the skin of the English language, and he just wears it like the fanciest coat you've ever seen. and he just twirls around in it and shows you all the details and look at this seam. Ooh, and what's in this pocket? And it just, as someone who English is their second language, I love that someone who English is their second language really takes it on in such a playful and interesting way that the majority of people who were native to this language don't employ it in that way. And it kind of makes me think that when you come to this language later, or through a different language, you're able to see it in a different lens. You're able to be more playful with it and break its rules and find new rules within it. There is so much wordplay and just, yeah, a lot of exploration of language and how it works and how it can be distorted in very different ways. So I think there's definitely merit to exploring this work and what it does with language. I feel like I've gone off topic. But
Well, you make a very good point, and I feel it's worth noting that he has an unapologetic use of a foreign language in this English language book. Now people are kind of forced or coerced into, oh, you have to put what the English is next to it, or you have to explain it for the layman. And he didn't at all.
Right. He didn't insult the reader's intelligence, sort of thing. It's like, it is
Right.
what it is. You do the research.
Right. If you want to
Yeah.
know what it is, look it up.
Right, and but also in the era, through the late 50s into the early 60s, the majority of literary readers knew enough French to understand what was in this book. It was common, especially Russians. There's a lot of French in Russian literature as well, right? Because that comes out of the heritage, the classic heritage. So I think that's part of the era too, right? Like learning about the history of literature, right? And in current books, I suspect, and we're seeing it more and more, Spanish is coming into current literature without apology. And I think it falls into the exact same realm. In today's world, there's a lot more, especially in the English world, there's a lot more Spanish being spoken around us. And so it doesn't need to be explained. It's up to us as readers to figure that out, in my opinion, right? But that's, yeah.
Right.
I'll-
And I know some French. I was able to follow along with some, but there were some I had to look up. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, what I know is not this deep, like it's not this level. And he's just throwing it in there, and it's my job. Do I want to pull away and go do it or not? And
Right. And
sometimes
it was
it felt
literary
important.
French. It wasn't
Right.
even just
Yes.
common. It was literary French, right? There was meaning and symbol within the French.
And then
Yeah.
you'd go and be like, oh, that's so clever, you know?
Right. Yeah, the old man with the chess games, right? Amazing. That stuff was amazing. Anyway, yeah.
Can I jump in? Actually, it's funny you say that because my girlfriend and I, she lives in Monterrey, Mexico, so we kind of have a bilingual relationship. When it comes to that, when it's like she's like, you just speak in English, I'll just speak in Spanish. We do a little Spanglish too, and it's like it's up to you to learn. You know, you got to jump in the deep end, sort of thing. And then that's how I learned. Like my Spanish is vastly improved, and her English is way better than my Spanish now. Like she basically does speak English after 2 years. I'm like, wow, and look at this. This is just, and that's how it works with books. So you need to, I like in the Kindles how they have, you can, or any ebook really, it depends. You can like, look up definitions within in that interactive reading, which really does help. I mean, yes, there's the dictionary, of course, you could be a fuddy-duddy, but I do think it's very cool that as technology evolves, that modern readers are able to instantly decipher, or even just ask AI or ask Google, whatever, for whatever those issues are with big tech. It is just cool that we have the resources available. So there's really no reason to remain ignorant, I guess is my point. If you just want to, it takes a flick of the finger these days to learn anything you need to.
Yeah, and some of it, I didn't look into it immediately. I highlighted it and moved on because I was really into the scene.
Yeah.
Went back
You can
and
always
went, oh, that was very clever. What were you saying, Veronica?
to look at a slightly different angle of the question, not just as a literary work, but with the subject matter itself, there's merit there too, not just because it makes us uncomfortable, but because at the time that it came out, the idea of child sexual abuse was not something that was really even in the forefront of conversation, and it was very hidden. So I think bringing out this experience that unfortunately, a lot of children have, and pointing at it. And I think one of the things that this book has suffered from is that sort of just top line engagement of, oh, this book is about child sexual abuse. It must glamorize it. It must treat it like some sort of lascivious eroticism, which, if you spend any time with this book at all, it is immediately obvious that is not the intention to make Humbert Humbert seem like some sort of hero. In fact, the opposite. So
Yeah.
it points to this incredible societal ill that many choose to ignore, specifically in that period of time. And there has been some conversation that Nabokov himself was abused as a child. And so he might have had specific perspectives to bring to this type of narrative as someone who survived that type of trauma himself. So I do think it lends a gravity, it lends an opportunity to spotlight something that otherwise would not be spotlit.
Yeah, there's also an interesting thing that happens around the child abuse in the novel, which is Humbert Humbert continues to give the academic essay concept of the rules around the world and the rules around the states. There's this intellectual, because he's arguing with himself, right? It's a memoir. He's in an argument with himself about knowing what, because by the end he knows what he's done wrong, right? It's very clear. If you just have to make it to the end of the novel to get there. But it's very clear he's apologetic and sympathetic to himself. But he gives the argument along the way that this has always been the way it's been. It's always been accepted. It's always right. It's been changed over time, right? Where women, female children, have more rights now than they used to. So that's all being explored within there too. It's very interesting. I think it's interesting too to read this novel through the lens of Bastard Out of Carolina, which is just a few years off, and it covers the same topics, but in a very different way. The systemic sexual abuse of women, of young women. It's very interesting. So if you're looking for something to pair, for some uncomfortable winter reading, I would put those books together.
With the caveat that prepare for nightmares, because
Prepare for nightmares. Absolutely.
it's a lot to pile them up on top of each other.
Right, but I think they sit up against each other.
They do. I mean, I've read both, so
yeah,
I know exactly what you're referencing, and they're both very disturbing. But my experience in doing these banned books, and some of them having, the year I did The Kite Runner, there were some other really dark books that it was like by the end of it, I was not okay. It's like, let me spread these out.
Yeah, I read them all this year. Yeah, and so, but I think they all do shelve next to each other, and I think there's something about comparative literature when you look at all of these texts and it's generation after generation, literally after those three books are three very different generations dealing with the same topics.
Right.
So it's real. I think this is the point of these books, right? Is that we need to keep having the conversation. Dorothy Allison talked about the idea, and I'm sure Nabokov got it too. The idea that people will come up to her and say, "Thank you for writing this book. I had never seen my story before."
Yeah.
And now I feel like I can have a voice. I think that's incredibly powerful. Right.
So once again, seeing yourself on the page.
Seeing yourself on the page. Yeah. Yeah.
And James, you never really had a chance to answer the question of taking the literary merit and controversy into consideration. What is the value in reading Lolita?
I guess capping everything and putting it together, it teaches us to think outside the box and not kind of live in an echo chamber either. I think it's important. Like this guy obviously is, I wouldn't want him around my daughter, this character, but I understand that we wouldn't know that kind of person, if we're just sheltered and don't live in the world, sort of, unless we read these books. And again, George Martin says it through one of his characters in Game of Thrones. The man who doesn't read lives one life. The one who does reads 1,000 before he dies. And I think that's so apt because, how do you know about other parts of the world? How do you know about other types of psychologies and people and lifestyles and whatnot, unless you are really engaging with people who write it authentically. And I think what the merit of Lolita is the authenticity. Like, the author really captures psychology well. He really captures the unreliable narrator well. He really captures just reality well, you know? And I think it to have that chunk missing is almost like having a lobotomy. It's just like not having the full spectrum, the full picture of things, and then you're kind of just limited in your thinking. So whether it's for good or evil, you know, I think it's important for us to challenge. I mean, of course, it does raise issues like, should kindergartners read this? We may disagree. I personally don't think, you know, Lolita or The Stranger or even Siddhartha are necessarily appropriate or necessary for kindergartners to read. I think they should focus on the ABCs, one, two, threes, and then once they build past those and develop as humans, then they can have those building blocks to understand deeper works like this. So it's like, don't ban them for life, but for a while you can have restrictions. And I think that's where the issues are being conflated ultimately in the public discourse. So honestly, I'm like, no, I don't think a 5-year-old should read Lolita just because
But I don't
they're
think many 5-year-olds are being exposed to Lolita. I think
right,
that's the
right,
narrative they're
right.
trying
They're
to
not,
throw
they're
at you,
not.
but it's like, no, there are
No,
no
of course.
5-year-olds in high school.
No, right, of
You
course, I
know?
know. But if what I'm saying is, if you know, unstoppable object meets an immovable force, if that conversation does come up, like that would be my stance. However, I would say, but when they are mature enough, and it's like age ratings, we do it with Blockbuster when that was around, with movies, with video games, you know, maturity levels, and it's just like, okay, here's what's behind this room, just so you know, your parents, the school, so everyone's on board. Okay, this is what's we're about to walk through this. You ready? Okay, here it is. And now we're going to be more fully fledged humans. So I would never, you know, I would die. I would die to keep this book in print because it means life. It means a lot of things. So I would never want to ban that book. However, I do understand age restrictions. So the thing is, I think it's a bit subjective with people. So that's kind of where the war is at. Like, what's appropriate for kids at what age? And I do feel those conversations do conflate when it comes to banning versus age restrictions. So that's kind of where I'm at. But ultimately, I'm more laissez-faire, you know, when it comes to adults reading anything. Hey, read the darkest, most, you know, NC-17 thing there is, because that's how we evolve. And without that, we just remain stagnant. So that's, you know, controversy is good because without it, you know, who are we? We're just kind of like NPCs. Okay, so that's my spiel.
Veronica, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
There's such value to this work for so many different reasons. And one of the things that I feel has come up in conversation around this book from a feminist perspective is perhaps the idea that, well, this isn't really Lolita's story. This is Humbert's story, and Lolita's not really in it. And that's something that I want to push against. It really is up to the reader. This is why I think this type of work is so important, because Nabokov relies on you to be an engaged participant, which is part of the reason why this book is so difficult to get through, is because you feel as if you are complicit, because the type of writing that this is, it doesn't allow you to be passive. You have to be engaged. You have to be reading between the lines, not only because the language is so difficult and acrobatic, but also because, as James and Gregory said, this is an unreliable narrator, and you find that out very quickly. So you're constantly parsing the truth from what is said. And if you pay attention, you see her, you see Lolita, you see Dolores Hayes, who she is as a child, her interests, her passions, her personality does shine through if you pay attention. But you do need to pay attention. And I think that is one of the things that maybe is most uncomfortable about this book, is what it demands from you. You can't just sit back and read it. You have to participate.
James, any final thoughts?
Well, so I think I don't want to be redundant. I pretty much got everything out. I kind of agree with everyone here for the most part. I think those are really, and they're actually really introspective approaches that, you know, I didn't necessarily have walking into this. So in hindsight, I can kind of, you know, digest it again, but like from different lenses here.
Mhm.
and it just because I've been reading a lot of Star Wars novels lately, so it's great to actually because they're very addictive, but it's great to like get outside of that. I was reading some Soviet history, which kind of tied into this with the Russian Empire and the czars and all that stuff. And what's his name? Solzhenitsyn and uh Tolstoy and Do, I can never say
Dostoevsky.
Dostoevsky, yes. That. Yes, I can never say his name. So I've been getting more into Russian literature lately, and it's just great. It's like, wow, when it's cold and you got some vodka, you write some great stuff. Some of the best literature came out of the 1800s and 1900s from Russia. It's so fascinating. So just good job there, in terms of the literary merit. It's fantastic. So it makes me want to actually just even find more authors. So if you guys got any names, you can send me that privately.
I will.
Thank you. So that's all. That's all I got.
My nudge on the Russians is it's all about and that's why this book is powerful too. The Russian, I love Dostoevsky, but you have to find the right translations because the early translations are terrible, and so the books don't make any sense in the early translations. So you have to find modern translations for the books to make more sense. Just saying.
I find Penguin's usually pretty good. Yeah.
but you have to get the later ones over the early ones anyway. But
yeah.
And that's why Nabokov is so powerful, because we're getting a true translation of Russian, because this is really Russian storytelling, I think, deep down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Gregory, final thoughts?
Read a book. Seriously, we need to read. People need to read more books, and we need to think about them, right? Book banning's bad. We all agree about that, right? Everyone who's made it to this far into the end, we agree book banning is bad, right? It's bad. So read a book, talk about it with your friends, get into a book group, and that idea of deep reading, we can do it on our own, but we have to learn how to do it. I don't think young people are being taught how to analyze literature very well at all, having taught a lot of freshman college students, right, who've never read a book, literally never read an entire book. So read a book. And if you've never read a book, read a book. Like it's never too late to start. And just stand up for your rights, just in general, because it's so important. It's so important to have a voice.
One thing to add: when Gregory says read a book, audiobooks count. That counts.
Yes.
I listen to a lot of audiobooks. They keep me from road rage when I'm in the car, frankly. Read a book, listen to a book, talk about a book, buy a book. I mean, seriously, just books, information, ideas, right? That's the survival of us as a society, is ideas.
Keeps you sharp too. Keeps your mind going as I get into old age.
That's the youngest person here.
No, but in all seriousness, I'm like, oh well, if by Pilgrim's standards, I'm old. I'm almost towards my death. But it's like I find I'm like, if I didn't read right now, if I don't work out, I feel like my muscles will fall apart. If I don't read, my brain would just turn to mush. I'm like, I need to stay engaged. I need to. Tyrion Lannister says it. A mind needs a book like a sword needs a whetstone. A lot of good sayings from that guy. But yeah.
Thank you all for your valuable input and for being willing to engage with this challenging material.
Thank
you, Gregory.
Thank you for hosting us.
Seriously, thank you for doing this series. It's so important.
You're the best. You're a champ.
Thank you, Tonya.
Thank you. Gregory, where can people find you and support your work?
Kompes.com, KOMPES.com, or Gregory A. Kompes, wherever I'm on social media. That's my handle.
James?
You can query me if you're a writer and want to get published via the Kensington Book Submissions page for Citadel Nonfiction. And if you just want freelance editing services, you can find me on Reedsy, REEDSY.com /James-ABBATE, my name.
Do you want to plug your podcast?
Oh, I also do Star Wars Mind the Force. It's a Star Wars mental health component podcast. So we go into what's it like to be Darth Vader, or even C-3PO, or even be a droid, So we have on talent such as Steve Binder, who directed the holiday special, and Howard Kazanjian, I think, is coming up. Still need to go to contract on that, but it looks very likely. So we're growing a bit, and we're discussing the books, the films, the literature, getting mental health professionals like psychologists on. So you can read and see more of that and hear more wherever podcasts are streamed. But you can go to mindtheforce.com to see the episode list. Thanks for the plug.
I'm on Instagram and Blue Sky at Veronica Klash. Again, Veronica with a C, Klash with a K. And my podcast, once again, is Small Things Bedtime Love Stories.
Well, that's it for today's conversation. If you enjoyed what you heard, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for listening. And more importantly, thank you for reading.